Hi, my name is Sören Musyal. Me and my colleague Patrick Stegemann have been invited to speak here today. Unfortunately, we cannot be with you, and we also cannot make a live stream. That is why I recorded a video, in which I will read from the book that Patrick and me have published earlier this year, and in which we will also shed light on the cultural and international roots of that form of terrorism, which has taken place on October 9th in Halle. The book is called The Right-Wing Mobilization, and as I said, was published in January, and I'm happy to read to you the first chapter here. I've never read the whole chapter before in audience, so I don't quite know how long it will take. I hope it isn't going to be too long, and above all, I hope that it will be interesting to you. Also, if you have any questions on the content or any other thing, Patrick and I are both easy to find on Twitter and also easy to contact, so this will probably be the best way to submit your comments or questions. Chapter 1. When the Canary Bird Died. A young man introduces himself with the words, "Hi, my name is Anon. I believe the Holocaust never happened." He has sweat on his face, but he seems to be smiling. Feminism is the reason for the declining birth rate in the West, he continues. The West is the scapegoat for the worldwide mass migration, he says. And the root of all these problems is the Jew. When the camera rotates, it is attached to a helmet. From now on, the audience sees what Anon sees. It is the beginning of the 35-minute video that the assassin of Halle will stream live on the internet on October 9th, 2019. It shows him trying to enter a synagogue to cause a massacre on the highest Jewish holiday, Yom Kippur. You will see how he fails to shoot open the door with his homemade weapons, and then shoots a woman passing by. You will witness how he goes on in search of new victims and executes a guest in a kebab store. You will hear how he comments his actions, how he curses and seems to discuss the next steps with his audience. The terror of Halle was planned to become a copy of the massacre that cost 51 people their lives a few months earlier in Christchurch, New Zealand. The attack thus adds to other crimes of the year 2019 that took place in various places around the world. They are all connected by the fact that a certain internet culture made them possible. March 2019, somewhere in West Virginia, USA, another young man speaks into a camera. But this one is worried. "This is getting out of hand," he says emphatically. "Things are getting out of control here." Caleb Kane, American, mid-20s, has decided to explain in a YouTube video why he let himself be devoured by the so-called alt-right, the alternative right in the US. He's sitting in his apartment, visibly excited. "My Descent into the Alt-Right Pipeline" is the title of his video, in which he tells his story in just under 40 minutes. How he dropped out of college, moved back in with his parents, and sank into depression. How he buried himself in his room and surfed through the net in search of identity. "I wanted to be strong and have power," says Kane. On YouTube, like so many others, he eventually stumbled upon right-wing channels, sucked up their videos, and immersed himself ever deeper into a world of conspiracy theories, racism, and homophobia. Within a short time, he radicalizes himself. His jokes about minorities are no longer jokes at some point. Caleb Kane spent 3 years in the right-wing sphere. Then on March 15, 2019, he decides that something has to change, that he will break his silence. It is that Friday when a terrorist executes 51 people in 2 New Zealand mosques. He announces his act about half an hour before on the internet, in a forum called 8chan. He writes that it is time to stop shitposting, time for real action. Caleb Kane is also in this forum. It is one of the most important meeting places of the scene called alt-right. When he sees with his own eyes how an attack originates from this community and how the perpetrator is celebrated for the mass murder, he begins to understand the world he has been helping to build all these years. 4chan and 8chan, these largely unmoderated forums, are considered to be the internet's dirty corners. Here, racism, pornography, and stupid jokes stand side by side. Always have been. The fact that one of these alleged bad kids has now taken it seriously shocks and surprises many people in equal measure. How could it ever have come to this? At the time of the attack, the online culture that gathers on 8chan had already gone through a process of politicization and radicalization that lasted for years. The terrorist attack in Christchurch is in many ways the tragic climax of this development. For, as will become apparent, Christchurch is the most devastating, but not the first act to originate from this environment. The chans, that is various anonymous forums, have long been ridiculed as apolitical spaces where nerds and freaks live out their crude humor and their fetishes. Sometimes they are confused with darknet, that part of the internet that has only accessible via certain software and where everything is available from contact killings to weapons to drugs. The chans, however, are normally accessible websites. 4chan is in particular one of the most influential producers of online culture. Pictures, jokes, memes that we know from YouTube or Facebook often have their origin there. The chans are so-called image boards. Pictures are posted on them, which are then distributed, changed, and provided with other messages by others, and memes are created. These are text and image quotations that are taken up and placed in new context. The word meme is borrowed from the Greek word for imitation. It is therefore something that is reproduced again and again through imitation. Theoretically, it could be anything: songs, gestures, stories, or even pictures, which are provided with a new text or used in completely different contexts. On image boards like 4chan or 8chan, the main purpose is to post funny pictures and find the best memes that are shared and spread by others. One of the most famous image memes shows a couple walking hand in hand, but the man turns around with an admiring look at another woman. His partner acknowledges this with outrage. Countless variations of this picture are circulating on the internet in which the three persons are each labeled differently. An example: the man is labeled I, his girlfriend, scientific evidence that is unhealthy to stare directly into solar eclipse, the woman he turns to, eclipse. Often this is funny, but often it is also offensive, racist, misogynist. The story of 4chan begins relatively harmlessly. Inspired by an anonymous Japanese text board called 2chan, the then 15-year-old American Christopher Poole founded it in 2003. The users mainly exchanged information about anime and mangas, Asian comics. So-called original posters, or OPs for short, write a contribution on an aspect that interests them and attach a picture. Other users can leave comments or upload their own pictures. All of this happens anonymously and leads to the forum being received enthusiastically and growing rapidly. Other topics are added, new subforums are created, so-called boards. Today, 4chan is a much visited website and maintains 70 boards on a variety of topics such as weapons, photography, fashion, video games, or pornography. According to the operator, 27.7 million visit the platform every month. Between 900,000 and a million posts are created per day. By comparison, the Spiegel News website is the most read news site in Germany, with almost 23 million visitors per month in 2019. But as the popularity grows, so does the hate in the forum. Especially the board /new, on which current events can be debated, soon drifts into racist and anti-Semitic discussions. But in other parts of 4chan, the atmosphere is poisoned as well. For example, in the board /b for mixed topics. Because it is part of 4chan's philosophy to advocate radical freedom of expression, nothing that does not violate US law is deleted. Another way must be found if the forum is not to frighten normal users, and of course, advertising customers. Founder Poole decides to channel the hate and in 2011 creates a new board called /Paul, which becomes the most famous and infamous section of the site. People are quickly gathering here who, as journalist Talia Levin put it, want to say the N-word openly, demonize feminists, and believe there is a devilish Jewish influence. In short, in the shadow of anonymity and under the protection of free speech, /pol, which does not stand for politics but for politically incorrect, becomes a stronghold of concentrated anti-feminism, racism, anti-Semitism, and the glorification of National Socialism. According to the American NGO Southern Poverty Law Center, conversations on /pol are characterized by the racist superiority of a white race. Pool's attempt to control the hatred of 4chan fails. The hate is not diminishing, it is only concentrating. In 2013, further restrictions follow, such as the introduction of so-called janitors and other moderation tools to control the ranting tirades in the forum. The founder of the former bastion of unrestricted free speech, which also consists of insults, threats, and misanthropy, gives in. And although this does not mean that such contents would be banned from 4chan for good, Pool introduces ways to regulate discussions, at least theoretically. A decision that will produce something like 4chan's little, even more evil brother. In response to the new rules, Frederick Brennan, a 19-year-old American at the time, founds the functionally identical 8chan in October 2013. Welcome men to 8chan, the darkest place of the internet, it says on the starting page. From now on, the true freedom of opinion will be found here. But access numbers remain low for a long time, and Big Brother 4chan remains the first port of call for cross-border content of all kinds. Many Chan users take a thieving pleasure in violating social norms, with particularly crude racist and misogynist jokes. An argument that is often heard in this environment is just a few harsh jokes in an internet forum. What's the big deal? In fact, even back then, it is already apparent how the culture of the Chans is gradually radicalizing itself and its members. And the hate does not stay on the internet. Especially in the history of 4chan, there are a number of incidents that show how the supposed online fun turns into real offline hate. Time and again, people are convicted of possession of child pornography that they have downloaded from the site. In 2006, bomb threats are posted on 4chan for several US states. On the last day of the Muslim month of Ramadan, explosive devices are set to explode in several football stadiums. The games can only take place under extreme security control. The perpetrator states that he did not assume that anyone would take his post seriously because he himself did not believe anything that was posted at 4chan. In December 2008, a 20-year-old Australian is arrested after writing on the forum that he wanted to kill as many people as possible. In February 2009, a school in Sweden is evacuated after a shooting was announced on 4chan for fun. But it didn't stop at macabre jokes. In November 2014, several pictures of the body of a strangled woman appear on 4chan. The text, "I found out that it is much more difficult to strangle someone than it looks like in movies." And further, "Check the news. In a few hours for Port Orchard, Washington. In fact, the police find a corpse. The offender is later sentenced to 82 years in prison." In addition, there are countless hacker attacks that are prepared and planned in the forum. Users publish private data and addresses of arbitrarily selected people or distribute stolen nude pictures of dozens of famous actresses. The list of verbal and nonverbal acts of violence on 4chan is long, especially the play with Nazi symbols of all kinds is very popular. In 2008, 4chaner managed to manipulate the Google list of the most searched terms so that a swastika appeared at the top. This may still be taken as a silly joke. The users had simply Googled the HTML code for the swastika countless times and thus brought it to the top of the list. Besides symbols that are forbidden in Germany at least, It is also assassins and mass murderers that attract the interest of 4chan. There is a kind of assassin card game that shows pictures of 16 assassins or assassin duos who are assigned points according to the number of victims divided into adults and children. Additional points are awarded for police officers killed and for subsequent suicide. At first glance, the selection seems arbitrary. The Norwegian Anders Breivik stands next to the Columbine assassins, the Tsarnaev brothers who are responsible for the 2013 bombing in Boston, or even next to the pilot Andreas Lubitz, who committed suicide in the Alps with a fully occupied German wings machine. So this game is not so much a political message as the expression of a fascination with murder and violence. But if we take a closer look at some of the mass murderers depicted in the card game, several things stand out. First, there are the two students who committed one of the most momentous school murders in Columbine, Colorado on April 20, 1999. The perpetrators were not only characterized by severe psychological problems, but also by the fact that they were gamers. The same applies to the shooter who murdered children, teachers, and his mother at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012. The report, released 2 years later, states that his video game addiction and drifting off into a small cyber community that shared his dark and obsessive interest in mass murder, encouraged the act. Tim Kretschmer, who shot 15 people in his school on March 11, 2009, is also part of the Assassin card game. The Winnenden shooting triggered a loud debate about violent video games because this perpetrator was also a passionate gamer. It was often complained that the depiction of violence in the games made young people aggressive and, in the worst case, triggered them to become killers. This very simple stimulus response argument is misleading. A game alone does not make someone a murderer. World of Warcraft, a very popular game in the scene, is, for example, in terms of the depiction of violence, a relatively harmless online role-playing game. And with Minecraft, a creatively demanding construction simulator takes an important place. Far more important than the individual game is the surrounding environment. Many of those celebrated in the card game identified strongly with this scene. One of the Columbine shooters created his own worlds for a first-person shooter. The Sandy Hook assassin was so addicted to a slot machine that the arcade operator had to pull the plug to make him go away. And the Winnenden assassin was also a passionate video gamer. The target group of the game industry is still, and despite certain efforts to reach women as well, very male. Its strongly masculine nature is increasingly giving rise to misogyny, and so it is not accidental that many of the young men in the Assassin card game were not only gamers, but also alleged misogynists. After the Winnenden rampage, it was suspected that misogyny could have been a motive for the crime. 11 of the 12 youths shot in the school were girls. Elliot Rodger, who shot 6 people in Isla Vista, California in 2014, and Marc Lépine, who killed 14 women in Montreal, Canada in 1989, also committed their respective crimes out of anti-feminism and the conviction that they had been forced into involuntary celibacy by women. Both of them can be found in the 4chan Assassin card game. The war against women and its consequences. This group of men who blame feminists in particular and women in general for their sexual inactivity calls itself incels, which means involuntary celibacy. Originally founded as a support group to give lonely men some self-confidence and encouragement, the movement has since developed into a radical men's community that openly expresses its misogyny. To them, women are Stacys, attractive, or Beckys, unattractive, while men are divided into Chads, desirable alpha males, or weak betas. Women are often referred to as femoids in the scene, a neologism made up of female and humanoids. which means something similar to human chemistry. Because incels consider themselves sexually unattractive, some try to maximize themselves, diet, exercise, and work on their charisma. Anything to escape the inceldom, the unfree celibate life. Some, however, believe that there is only one solution to their male problems: to kill themselves or others. It is this crude worldview that leads Elliot Rodger to murder 6 people in Isla Vista in 2014, because girls in the past found him unattractive and refused to have sexual intercourse with him. He now wants to take revenge on some of them. In his pamphlet, he writes that he wants to put all women in concentration camps and let them starve to death. He himself would sit on a high tower and watch. In the meantime, Elliot Rodger has become a hero of the image boards and is celebrated as a role model in countless posts. In the card game, he carries the scene nickname the Supreme Gentleman. 4 years after him, Alex Menashin killed 10 people in Toronto with a car. He writes in a Facebook post addressing the 4chan community directly. The incel rebellion has begun. We will defeat all Chads and Stacys. Hail to the Supreme Gentleman Elliot Rodger. Minutes later he starts his attack. 4chan and 8chan have long played a central role in the incel movement. Here, needs, which means not in education, employment or training, meet and complain about missed life chances, indulge in self-pity and complain about their loneliness. This is a good breeding ground for hatred of women, who have been identified as the culprits for the situation. On the forums, not only the Supreme Gentleman is revered as a hero. Young men also announce their own acts of violence. Christopher Harper Mercer, who, among other things, out of hatred against women, murdered 9 people, warned his brothers on the eve of his attack. In spirit of 4chan, some of you are quite alright. Do not go to school tomorrow if you live in the Northwest. Happening thread will be posted tomorrow. See you later. The first comment below is the beta rebellion finally starting? Beta uprising is another term for the incel rebellion that the perpetrator of Toronto conjured up, or for the war against women that Elliot Rodger wanted to wage in Isla Vista. All these perpetrators are representative of a group of young men who seek their salvation in violent revolution against the world of women. Rodger is their pioneer. The fact that he is revered in Chan culture casts doubt on the thesis that the forums are about the harmless, purely intellectual crossing of cultural boundaries. Rather, the impression is created that a dangerous worldview is hidden behind the rude humor cultivated in these forums. And this view is not only based on the self-pity of violent bachelors, but also on racist and anti-Semitic thinking. Often, one goes hand in hand with the other. Especially the case of William Atchison, who claims to have been spirited into his former high school assassination attempt by Elliot Rodger, shows how resentment merges. In 2016, Atchison receives a visit from the FBI because he asked in a gaming forum where he could get an assault rifle. Atchison also turns up in connection with the assassination attempt in Munich on July 22, 2016. There, the 18-year-old student David Sonboli shoots 9 people in a shopping center and kills himself afterwards. He thought his victims were foreigners, and for his act he chose the anniversary of the attack by Anders Breivik. And yet the authorities do not recognize the attack as right-wing motivated. Only more than 3 years later, at the end of October 2019, do they follow the expert's assessment. David Sonboli, as the investigation reveals, exchanged information about the attack with Atchison in online forums prior to his crime. The investigators, both Americans and Germans, apparently do not know about this connection until later, and Atchison is not arrested despite his efforts to obtain a weapon. Atchison celebrates the deed of his German brother in a group he founded on the platform Steam. Users buy games and network with each other on this platform. The name of Atchison's group is Anti-Refugee Club. Atchison is a convicted troll and sympathizer of the alt-right. He writes racist posts on YouTube and Steam, but also on relevant right-wing extremist sites such as Daily Stormer or the /Paul board of 4chan. It only takes a little more than a year until he takes action himself. On December 7, 2017, Atchison shot and killed a student at Aztec High School in New Mexico. Afterwards, he kills himself. During the autopsy, the investigations discover various painted messages on his body, a swastika and the letters SS, but also the slogan, "Build the Wall," which Trump's followers like to shout at his events. There is also the acronym AMOG, which stands for Alpha Male of the Group and is used under incels to denote the strongest men in the group. Among those who have moved from the anonymity of the chants into the limelight of violence, Atchison is particularly representative of the overlap of chauvinist ideologies that characterize chant culture today, and the alt-right. The fact that racists, misogynists, gamers, and trolls in the US today can form the alt-right's great collective movement, that murderers like William Atchison can justify their deeds to themselves in this diffuse worldview, is due in no small part to the so-called Gamergate controversy of 2014. It is a kind of key event for the emergence of the alt-right movement, and it seems as if this has not been recognized for years. Journalist Matt Lees wrote in the British Guardian, "This hashtag Gamergate, was the canary in the coal mine, and we ignored it." So was Gamergate a warning? There is much to suggest that. Gamergate and its backgrounds. In the beginning, before Gamergate becomes a hashtag, there is the game developer Zoe Quinn and her game Depression Quest. Quinn's work was published in 2013 and deals with her experiences with depression. An indie product, a small-scale programmed game that breaks with normal playing habits and will lead to an event of enormous importance for the alt-right. Shortly after its release, Quinn is harassed and insulted online for months. The work is too unconventional, too little focused on the usual aspects of popular games, skill, performance, and violence, for the gamer mainstream to take it up well. The scene press, however, does indeed do so. It is one of the games that appeared more and more frequently at the time, which did not focus on fun, but rather on using the possibilities of the medium to draw attention to important topics and even more dark topics, be it depression, as in Quinn's Depression Quest, or the incurable illness of one's own child, as in the game That Dragon, Cancer. This change in the computer game scene itself also contributes to Gamergate. Many gamers of those days were outraged. They felt that Depression Quest was discussed too often relative to its quality, and even suspected a media conspiracy. Instead of measuring the game by the standards of the scene, they argued they were being given a political message that was supposed to change the gaming culture. The fact that the hatred that Quinn has been exposed to from the very beginning may have led to more intensive reporting does not occur to these people involved. But the actual starting point for Gamergate is provided by Zoe Quinn's ex-boyfriend in a blog post that he published on various sites on the 15th and 16th of August 2014. He accuses her of embezzlement and bribery. More precisely, she's said to have slept with a journalist from the trendy magazine Kotaku so that he would review her game well. Only a week later will Kotaku refute these accusations. The employee in question may have had an affair with Quinn, but never discussed her game. Even later, Quinn's ex-boyfriend will admit that his post was not directed by any interest in journalistic ethics, but solely by a desire for revenge. It is telling. A wave of hatred that has been going on for years, one of the most powerful anti-feminist movements, is born from a man's hurt feelings. When the offended man reveals his true motivation in November 2014, much has already happened. In mid-August 2014, the Zoe post appeared, a 10,000 character text with excerpts from Facebook conversations, and on the same day a front was formed against the accused on 4chan. One day later, the subforum Kotaku in Action is created on Reddit, one of the most frequently accessed web forums in the world. From here, Gamergate is significantly advanced. On August 18th, a user in a chat room called Burgers and Fries calls out the Quinspiracy. The declared goal: we're going to smash her career. There will be no survivors. On August 19, Quinn is doxxed for the first time. Her address and phone numbers are published on the internet. On August 22, 8chan founder Frederick Brennan invites the Gamergaters to 8chan because 4chan moderators have repeatedly deleted Quinn's personal data. On August 25th, the YouTube video Tropes vs. Women in Video Games by feminist journalist Anita Sarkeesian appears, in which she criticizes the portrayal of women in computer games. Sarkeesian complains that these are only decorative accessories to the mostly male-leading roles and that many games sell violence against women. She then becomes the second prominent victim of the hatred. Only 2 days later, on August 27, she flees from her home because she no longer feels safe due to the vast number of death and rape threats. Zoe Quinn announces on the same day that she too has left her home. The actor Adam Baldwin tweets, also on August 27, about Gamergate and thus helps the whole thing to get its name. On August 28th, a highly acclaimed text appears in the online magazine Gamasutra. Journalist Lee Alexander explains gamers are over in view of the raging shitstorm. Many other media take up the article, which is new fuel to the media conspiracy theorists. We could go on at this rate. We could enumerate which people also become victims of the hate mob, as Quinn calls the Gamergate Trolls. One could list which Gamergate victims, but also perpetrators, have been doxxed. The number of voluntarily and involuntarily involved persons is huge, just the persons known by name. The anonymous trolls of the chans, not yet counted by Reddit and Burgers and Fries. But there is no need for this list because even the few events mentioned here show the explosive power of the debate that supposedly revolves solely around computer games. The consequences can still be felt today, and they reach as far as the White House. How the extreme right embraced gamers and never let go. As early as the end of August 2014, the gamers debate will turn into an explicitly political strategic one. On August 31, Mike Chernovich joined Gamergate. He's a moderator for the right-wing, extremist and conspiracy theory website Infowars. One day later, Milo Yiannopoulos, the outbird of the radical right, also joins in. His open homosexuality and his curious appearance cause confusion, especially in his own camp. He publishes the text, "Feminist mobbers split the video game industry," on the right-wing Breitbart website. A few weeks later, on September 22, Yiannopoulos starts talking on 8chan and continues to contribute to the popularity of the forum, which by this time has long since become the scene of Gamergate. Subsequently, numerous neo-Nazis and white supremacists jump up and discover their gaming passion. In one of the oldest right-wing extremist forums, Stormfront, more and more users know the value of the gamer uprising. The user Wake Up White Man writes, "Gamergate has broad support from young white men who otherwise don't care about political issues. This is the perfect opportunity to slowly open their eyes to the Jewish question," which means nothing other than the Jewish world conspiracy. when the extreme right perpetuated the Gamergate controversy, they followed a double calculation. It is a common social media strategy to participate in viral debates in order to gain notoriety and subscribers. In addition to that, however, right-wing demagogues like Yiannopoulos and sites like Breitbart sense their chance. As Wake Up White Man describes it, they hope to be able to steer the widely politicized crowd in their direction. In this sense, Breitbart, which was already a central organ of the right even then, took up individual elements of the Gamergate controversy and generalized them. Andrew Breitbart, eponym and founder of the right wing, once himself issued the doctrine, politics is downstream of the culture. I want to change the cultural narrative. The gamers' counterculture seems made for this. An attitude towards culture and politics that we will encounter even more frequently, for not only Breitbart but also the new right in Germany see culture as the lever for their conservative revolution. The journalist Matt Lees speaks of a common leader. He calls it broadening the war, an expansion of the battle zone, a phrase that the new right likes to use. The strategy is to jump on individual issues, earn the trust of the audience, and then indoctrinate them in other areas. In the case of Gamergate, the trick is working perfectly, with the right telling a very simple story. First, feminism threatens the video game industry, and then the whole of society. The imagined politically correct restructuring of the gaming scene becomes the politically correct restructuring of society. We find these rhetorical patterns today in the alt-right as well as in the German right-wing discourse. Gamergate aimed to destroy Zoe Quinn's career. She should no longer be allowed to have a say. Certainly not be allowed to program computer games, and even less should she be able to earn money with it. She and other critical voices were to be silenced. The gamers involved practiced a violent form of censorship and constantly staged themselves as victims. They are not the censors, but the supposed feminists who want to ruin their games. Yet the feminist criticism of video games is by no means their censorship. On the contrary, it is the integration of game culture into a larger social context. The gamers are not interested in this. They interchange perpetrator and victim and thus create a template that is frequently used by right-wing activists. For example, when people who hold up diversity are called racists because they allegedly threaten the white race. Or when people who disseminate racist content on the internet and are prosecuted legally speak of censorship. In the course of the Gamergate debate, the far right succeeds in doing something very important. They can use an initially politically undirected rage for their own purposes and give it a direction. That this succeeds is also due to the actual cultural shifts in the gaming scene, which for a long time has revolved primarily around men and masculinity. The journalist Lee Alexander summarizes the quintessence of the gaming mainstream of the time as follows: have money, have women, get a gun, then get a bigger one, be an outsider, and celebrate that. Defeat anyone who threatens you. You don't need cultural references. You don't need anything but gaming. But the industry is changing. Games like Zoe Quinn's are an expression of the cultural change, which means that computer games can do more than just satisfy male consumer interests. They are becoming a form of art, praised for their novel-like storytelling, and are the subject of literary seminars. Alexander says, traditional gaming knocks off its shell like a beetle, culturally and economically mixed. And journalism follows this example. So when Alexander claims that gamers are over, she's referring to the development that is taking place in the entire gaming industry and is considerably weakening the position of the white male gamer. From now on, they will have to share their hobby with housewives, students, feminists. It is hard for them to hear that nothing belongs to them, not anymore, that they are no longer the most important demographic consumers, says Alexander. And this is exactly the core of the debate, a formerly privileged group that sees its prerogative threatened and therefore strikes back. Doesn't this story sound familiar? This is the point where the far right joins in. Why do people like Yiannopoulos and Chernovich suddenly worry about the plight of white children who play shoot-'em-ups in their basements? Why is the former suddenly taking sides for a subculture that he himself writes he has ignored for years? Because they have recognized that in Gamergate, the cultural struggle which they themselves are trying to wage is taking place on a small scale. The Breitbart widening the battle zone is a perfect way to educate the gaming scene, heard in its pride, about the universal dangers of political correctness and of feminism. The supposed abolition of the gamer as the only relevant category in the industry is extended to Western civilization, the white race, and the predominance of the male gender. By opening these categories from now on, not only gamers and incels can participate in Gamergate, the corresponding forums attract more radical rights from now on. The already rampant anti-feminism and the racism in the chan boards will increase and above all be consolidated. Previously unknown right-wing radicals such as Yiannopoulos and Chernovich, or the British YouTuber Carl Benjamin, also known under his nickname Sargon of Akkad, suddenly become relevant figures in the gaming scene, which only becomes noticeable to them because they suddenly stand up for them, and as a result lead to the ideology of the alt-right. Gamergate is the birth of the alt-right. The alt-right, Sieg Heil and Comic Frogs. Alternative right is the self-designation of an extremely heterogeneous movement. Similar to the New Right in Germany, the name is intended to disguise the old right ideological elements and make the old appear new. In contrast to the New Right in Germany, however, the movement from the USA emphasizes explicit racism and the National Socialism and anti-Semitism more clearly. For example, the prominent representative and self-declared namesake of the old right, Richard Spencer, calls for a white ethno-state. He rejects any mixing of races. After the election success of Donald Trump, he shouted, "Hail Trump" and "Hail Victory." The latter is Spencer's preferred greeting in general. Many sympathizers of the alt-right see themselves as identitarians. The Generation Identity, the US-American offshoot of the identitarians from Europe, is smaller than the European group, but is very close to it. It focuses on the white Western tradition of the USA, which must be preserved, as they say. In March 2016, a text by Milo Yiannopoulos and Alam Bukhari appeared on Breitbart, which explains the self-image of the alt-right in more detail. Breitbart was already known back then as a far-right news site, and when the boss at the time, Steve Bannon, officially announced in July 2016 that it was the alt-right's platform, it was no longer a surprise. The fact that Steve Bannon will become the campaign chief of the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump just 1 month later in August 2016 will keep us busy in this book. First, however, it is about the self-description of the alt-right, which can be found in the aforementioned text by Yiannopoulos and Bukhari. It is a perfidious text. The two authors present themselves neutrally, as if they do not identify with the movement, only to absolve it from accusations of racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. Both authors are regular editors of Breitbart, and Yiannopoulos in particular is touring the United States as an alt-right pop star with a show. But the text is interesting in another aspect, namely because it shows a broad spectrum of groups that the two see as part of the alt-right, thus giving an impression of their heterogeneity. For them, the movement has 4 pillars: the intellectuals, the natural conservatives, the meme team, and the 1488s. The intellectuals are the counterpart to the New Right in Germany, inspired by authors of the interwar period such as Julius Evola, Oswald Spengler, or the French Nouvelle Droite. They provided, according to Yiannopoulos and Bukhari, the ideological foundation. The natural conservatives are those people who have a conservative instinct of their own accord, who are thus out of themselves for homogeneity instead of heterogeneity, for hierarchy instead of equality, for the known instead of the new. The 1488ers are neo-Nazis. The 14 stands for the 14 words of a racist slogan, according to which the survival of the white race has the highest priority. The 88 stands for the well-known game with the 8th letter of the alphabet. The 1488s appeared inevitably, although nobody really wanted them, the two Breitbart apologists write. In their opinion, the liberal mainstream is trying to brand the entire alt-right as 1488s and thus discredit it. There are, of course, reasons why neo-Nazis who wave swastika flags in their spare time may feel represented by the alt-right. For Yiannopoulos and Bukhari, the reason why the alt-right is equated with neo-Nazis again and again, however, lies in misunderstood jokes. For them, the fourth group, the meme team, does exactly that. Jokes that violate the alleged political correctness because they know that racism and misogyny are bad. They make racist jokes or misogynist jokes at 4chan. The authors portray Chan culture as a kind of rebellion of the youth against the mainstream. In the 60s, they think that 4chan would have been left-wing, just as the movement of 68 was. The bad kids on the image boards are therefore only border crossers, not serious racists. In this reading, the 68ers represent a movement of provocation. If they were interested in emancipation, it was only to provoke their parents' generation. In that, the alt-right, like the German New Right, repeatedly makes reference to the major student protests and points to the aspect of transgression. Alt-right and New Right thus cultivate their self-image as a counter-movement to the mainstream culture. This is also the view of the Irish author Angela Nagle, who certifies that Chan culture and alt-right are strongly striving for transgression. The goal is the constant crossing of cultural boundaries. The German culture scientist and gaming expert Christian Huberts has been observing the American and German gaming scene for years. He says, the crossing of borders, the crude joke, that's what the troll and the gaming scene have in common. The border crossing is especially attractive as an introduction to the scene. Come to us, you can say everything here and make jokes about everything. This message is a welcome promise for young men. It is often the beginning of radicalization biographies. However, the alt-right does not come about solely through the embrace of gamers by the extreme right. The tactics of the online mob, which are used during the Gamergate controversy, are part of the arsenal of the right-wing info warfare and thus in turn shape alt-right. The organization and coordination of mobs, the networking of different interest groups and reactionary populism are now a permanent feature of radical right-wing activity on the internet in the USA, but also in Germany and elsewhere. This convergence of right-wing extremism and Chan culture is also visibly changing the function of the image boards themselves. The relevant boards were once places where anonymous users reassured themselves in their misogyny and racism. Now they have become forums in which a political agenda is presented and followed. Anyone who travels to right-wing extremist forums will often encounter a question. What was your red pill? The term comes from the film Matrix, in which the main character Neo is confronted with the following choice. If you want to see the world with open eyes, take the red pill. But it also means you lead a life of resistance. If you want to continue living in illusion, then take the blue pill. So the moment of red pilling is the moment when people believe they understand the true essence of the world and believe they can escape the illusory world of the establishment. 4chan and related sites have become red pill marketplaces. Besides the incel rebellion, the uprising of the allegedly oppressed men, it is now also about the resistance of the whites. the defense of Western civilization, and the final solution of the Jewish question. A data leak in US American right-wing extremist forums in 2017 proves this radicalization and shows, among other things, that right-wing extremists themselves state as the reason for their radicalization. Journalist Robert Evans and the Bellingcat Research Network found 75 such red-pilling reports in a dataset collected by the Unicorn Right Media Collective. Hardly any of them are really surprising, because if we ignore the 4 people who cite an LSD trip as the cause of their awakening, the largest group refers to the Chan boards. The user Drink Bleach, for example, claims to have come across a red-pilling starter pack in this /Paul board. Max writes that he came across the board because he was looking for Hitler memes. What he found there opened his eyes. Mole NL reports that a friend recommended 4chan to him and even warned him, "Don't get on this Hitler did nothing wrong train." The casual manner in which men in these boards cite Chan culture as a decisive factor in their personal radicalization speaks volumes. In the Chans, there is a language of its own, codes that can only be understood by those who are already deep in the scene and which serve to distance themselves from the outside world. Time and again, for example, wise terms like the kekosphere, kekism, or simply kek appear. They are sufficient to signal which path you have taken yourself. Kek is something like the code word for the online word of radical Chan boards. Originally, it comes from the computer game World of Warcraft. There are 2 factions of players who are not supposed to communicate with each other. If they do, however, their conversation is transformed into gibberish. In this system, kek is a translation for lol, an internet word used to express laughter. In extreme right-wing forums, a phrase that is supposed to mean laughter stands for the gateway to the alt-right, Holocaust denial, and anti-Semitism. From the history of the Chans, this makes sense. What began as black humor led via Gamergate to alt-right. The fact that there are users who claim to have only used Nazi ideology ironically in discussions at the beginning or to have made anti-Semitic statements for fun is symptomatic of the development that these forums have undergone. Kek, the loud laughter, is no longer fun. It has become a symbol of highly politicized irony culture. Today there is a country, Kekistan, a fantasy nation whose flag is modeled on the German Reich war flag. The red was replaced by green, the swastika by a kek palindrome, and the Wehrmacht cross by the 4chan logo. In the meantime, this flag is also appearing outside the internet, at demonstrations of the radical right in the USA, for example at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where a protester was killed by a neo-Nazi when he drove his car into the crowd. The Kekistan flag is a further example of the common argumentation of the Chan user. When asked about it, most people would probably answer that the flag is only intended to embarrass those social justice warriors who recognize the reference to the Reich war flag. But in certain forums, Kekistan means more. There, the letters stand as an abbreviation for kill every Kaik, immediately start the Aryan nation. It is this ambiguity that characterizes the Chan culture. Right activists use them deliberately to provoke, but symbols carry a meaning even when they are shown in an ironic way. Even if Kekistan began as a joke, it is now a symbol of alt-right. The practical thing about it is that it can always be claimed against outsiders that it was only a joke. In the group, however, these symbols are naturally recognized. They create a strong separation from the outside world and strengthen the sense of community. They allow us to point our finger at the others, at the outsiders who, through their indignation, mark themselves as enemies. Typical alt-right emblems are often open in content, like the flag that is also used by simple trolls. In this way, memes are also carried by those who perhaps know, mean, and understand them quite differently. The most famous example is the comic picture Pepe the Frog. Matt Fury invented it back in 2005, but the green comic frog did not become widely famous until 2015 when 4chan discovers him for themselves and makes him one of the biggest memes on the internet. Especially the board /R9K is probably responsible for the fact that an innocent cartoon character has become the symbol of alt-right. The Anti-Defamation League, a non-governmental organization dedicated to the fight against all forms of hatred, has officially listed him as a racist symbol since 2016. It is certainly also used by non-right-wing internet users. However, the association of the comic figure with racist content makes it increasingly difficult to understand it as politically neutral. Pepe is no longer conceivable without the variations in SS uniform or as a border guard on the Mexican border. In this way, the internet culture is instrumentalized for warfare with memes. After the Christchurch massacre, it did not take long before Pepe appeared on the Chan boards in a black combat suit with helmet and the right-wing radical sun wheel. The Christchurch edition of The Frog pays homage to the radical right-wing perpetrator. This is exactly what he was counting on. He announced his crime on 8chan using the meme of an Australian shitposter. While streaming the attack live on Facebook, he plays an anti-Muslim song from the war in Yugoslavia. It has been circulating the web for years and bears the racist name Remove Kebab, where kebab stands for Muslim people. This inscription is also found on one of the assassin's weapons. And just before he enters the first mosque, he suggests to his viewers, subscribe to PewDiePie, a meme that was once created when an Indian Bollywood channel threatened to oust the Swedish influencer PewDiePie from number one of the most subscribed YouTube channels. This reacted with an absurdly huge campaign and thus started an ironic net movement. So the assassin puts great effort in getting attention from a very specific target group. The Christchurch assassin directly addresses the Chan culture. With its live stream and first-person shooter optics, it corresponds to the community's desire for violence and sensation and hopes for the greatest possible response in these boards. There he sees the most potential for imitation and the conservation of his ideas. The terrorist attack in Christchurch clearly shows the connection between troll culture and right-wing extremism. It is a new form of terrorism that no longer relies solely on terror and death, but uses the means of social media to directly seek out the audience that it is intended for. Live and in color. It is troll terrorism. Although the political content of the perpetrator's manifesto is clearly inspired by extreme right-wing ideologies, it is also paired with pop cultural references to ensure that its program does not simply disappear into the ether. The Assassin card game has shown that assassins can easily achieve cult status in Chan culture anyway. The Assassin of Christchurch will certainly also appear in it soon. Even months after the crime, new memes, homage and snippets of video from the livestream are posted daily in the relevant forums. The users discuss where to buy the same helmet the perpetrator was wearing and, of course, whether the Mossad is actually behind it all. The Christchurch assassin creates his own hero status by addressing the users directly and quoting this online culture. He even continues to build on this status at his first public appearance after his arrest. Almost incidentally, he adds another meme to the press photos, the OK hand sign, which in 2017 was reinterpreted by 4chaners in Operation OKKK, like other memes before it, as the arrangement of the fingers can be read as WP for white power. His fans, of course, acknowledge it with enthusiasm, cheering the perpetrator's ice-cold sarcasm. The Anti-Defamation League feels compelled to include an actually apolitical gesture in its database as a right-wing hate symbol. However, the public appearance would be ineffective if the perpetrator did not want to tell anything. Not only the act itself should be seen around the world, but also the ideas behind it. Hence, the manifesto. Written by a shitposter, it has to be read with care. It is full of lies, irony, and memes. Yet, it has a serious ideological core. Thus, the 74-page document is a mix of right-wing extremist ideology that can be found in the same form in Europe and in Germany. Maybe they are expressed in a little less radical way here, but the program of the Identitarians contains much that the assassin of Christchurch stood for. He justified the death of 51 people with an ideology that the Identitarians and the New Right have been propagating for years here in Europe. This becomes clear alone in the title of the manifesto, which is The Great Replacement. This is also the name of the central ideology and conspiracy theory of the Identitarians in Europe. According to this belief, the European population is gradually being replaced by the targeted promotion of migration, the result being the end of the European peoples. In the case of the Christchurch assassin, it means the demise of the white race. The only difference is that he, in contrast to the European Identitarians, openly refers to race theory. But the argument remains essentially the same. In the manifesto, it is already summarized in the introduction. The birth rates are the problem because of migrant women with a higher birth rate than the autochthonous population. This parallel between the New Zealand assassin and the identitarian movement was quickly recognized after the March attack. And the New Right is just as quick to deny this connection. After all, the assassin did not even once refer to the New Right or even the Identitarians, writes Patrick Leonard, former functionary of the Austrian division, on Twitter the same day. That the reference to the Great Exchange is clearly such a reference he conceals. The concept of struggle was already introduced in 2001 by the French right-wing radical Renaud Camus. In his book Le Grand Remplacement, he describes a secret program of repopulation, another radical right-wing term. Since then, Camus has been received mainly in France and Germany, from where the idea of population exchange has spread to the English-speaking world. In addition to the French original, the German version, Revolt Against the Great Exchange, translated by the identitarian Martin Lichtmes Semlitsch, has been published by the new right-wing publisher Antaios Verlag. English language adaptations like that on a website or the YouTube video The Great Replacement by alt-right-wing sympathizer Lauren Southern always make direct reference to Camus. So there is no concept of great exchange that does not originate directly from the European identitarians. The Great Exchange is not the only point of contact with the radical right in Europe. Thus, the Christchurch assassin refers several times to the ideas of ethnic pluralism, for example when he writes that he wishes only the best to all people as long as they only sought their happiness in their own countries. Although the assassin describes himself as an ethno-nationalist and not as an identitarian would do as an ethno-pluralist, the reference to this important theory remains. The theory of ethnopluralism was shaped in the 1970s by Henning Eichberg, the then leading German new right-winger. It propagates the inseparability of ethnicity and culture. According to it, every ethnic group has its own unchanging culture, so that immigration is not only a threat to the ethnic group, but also to culture. Those who claim to preserve a certain culture must consequently be against migration. Today's supporters of ethnopluralism certainly deny that the old right-wing extremist slogan, Germany to the Germans, foreigners out, follows from this. Nevertheless, they advocate remigration, if necessary by force, and mean nothing other than deportation. The manifesto contains further set pieces that suggest an ideological proximity to the vulgar conservatism of the new right of European character. Be it the reference to a hierarchical social structure, diversity is unequal, hierarchies are certain, to homogeneity, diversity is weakness, unity is strength, or to a supposed heroism and the affirmation of the struggle. Expect the fight of a soldier and the death of a soldier. All these concepts and motives also play a role in the writings of Ernst Jünger, for example, which are so important for the new right. Both the media and investigating authorities recognized this proximity in March 2019. The identitarian movement is under pressure, and probably for the first time in years, the extreme right-wing association is facing an existential crisis. For not only does the assassin so obviously refer to an identitarian worldview, he also supports the identitarian movement financially. He made donations to various identitarians in Europe, including Martin Sellner, born in 1989, who is the most prominent face of the identitarian movement in Europe and the co-founder of the groups in the German-speaking world. He puts new videos on his YouTube channel, which more than 150,000 people are subscribed to almost daily, and provides his audience with political and private information quasi-live on his Telegram channel. When Sellner calls, the young extreme right follows. At events, he signs his books, is available for selfies, shakes hands with older men who look as if they've met their savior. In short, Sellner is the prime example of a new right-wing influencer. On March 25, 2019, 10 days after Christchurch, the police searched Sellner's apartment in Vienna. The reason is a donation of 1,500 euros, which he received from the assassin. This donation is part of the assassin's plan to cause repression against patriots in order to ignite a civil war. Sellner will say in his defense, a strange defense, because it is questionable whether more than 7,000 euro, which identitarians all over Europe have received from the assassins, are really so harmful. It would probably have been much more devastating to mention Sellner and the identitarian movement by name in the manifesto, but this is not the case. And one can ask the legitimate question, why does a person in a uniform embroidered with a sun wheel feel like storming 2 mosques and murdering dozens of people represented by an association like the identitarians? Because he has misunderstood everything? Because he found himself to be equal amongst equals, others say. And they are probably right, because the parallels in thought shown here do not point to a wrong understanding of the assassin, but only to his radicalization. The roots of this radicalization can also be found on the internet and in the Chan forums where he announced his act. The many Chan assassins of the past years show the potential danger that lies there. Everything is getting out of control here and must be stopped, says Caleb Kane in his video about alt-right. But for the right-wing extremists of the Chans, the alt-right and the white supremacists, it has only just begun. The success of Donald Trump is their joint success, the attack of Christchurch their joint act, at least the beginning of a long series of similar acts. On April 27, 2019, a 19-year-old kills a man in a synagogue in Poway, California. He tries to broadcast his murders live on Facebook and publishes a manifesto on 8chan shortly before the crime. On 3rd August 2019, a 21-year-old man kills 22 people with racist motives in El Paso, Texas. He also posts an announcement and a manifesto on 8chan. On 10th August 2019, a young Norwegian tries to cause a bloodbath in a mosque, but is overwhelmed by a visitor. He posts his announcement on the End-chan image board, presumably because 8chan was taken off the net at the time because of the shooting in El Paso. He also posts a picture showing him in a row with perpetrators of Christchurch, Poway, and El Paso. On 9th October 2019, Chan terrorism reaches Germany when a man tries to enter the synagogue in Halle to cause a massacre. When he's presented to the judge 2 days later, his lawyer states that he was an 8chan before. The accused explains that after Christchurch, he began to prepare his crime. Like the other 3 imitators, he wanted to continue what was started in New Zealand. The mass murder in Christchurch has apparently led to a further radicalization of the alt-right and the Chan boards. As in first-person shooter games, the kills are counted and compared with the New Zealand attack. It is the gamification of terror. The image boards are now increasingly coming into the focus of the public and the authorities. After El Paso, an internet provider discontinued its cooperation with 8chan. The site then disappeared temporarily from the net. Even its founder, Frederick Brennan, who is no longer its owner, announced that he would do everything possible to keep the site offline, because the word is better off without it. As was the case with Gamergate, when the most radical channers moved from 4chan to 8chan, it can be assumed that the new meeting places will form. With N-chan, a forum is ready to welcome those who have become homeless. The 8chan refugees are welcomed on the homepage. In October 2019, an identical successor, 8con, went online, at least temporarily. Will not have been the last attempt. For a few years now, the new right in Germany has been trying to import this culture of hate, misanthropy, and lies into the German-speaking world. Political correctness has long been the common enemy image of the right. But since the last federal elections, activists have started the information war. Memes as swords, frogs as symbols, hatred and conspiracy as daily bread. Not least with the means of the alt-right, the new right in Germany is working on a cultural revolution from the right. In view of the drastic nature of the events of 2019, Walter Lübcke is murdered, extreme right-wing armed groups are keeping death lists of their political enemies, a 4chaner is trying to cause a massacre in a synagogue. In the face of all this, it can be assumed that the cultural struggle proclaimed in the Chan boards has also been raging in Germany for some time. Not only the appropriation of the internet and meme culture is central, but also the fact that Gamergate and alt-right are movements of the social media age. They grew up when the social networks became mainstream and are accordingly strongly influenced by them. Social media is the battlefield on the right-wing cultural stage, and it determines the way the war is fought. Influencers have a special role to play here. In Germany, too. It can be observed how the new right seeks to build up well-known internet personalities. Then we go on with a chapter on influencers. So this was pretty long. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it interesting. Forgive me if I misread sometimes. As I said, you can contact Patrick and me on Twitter. So thank you for being there. And all the best.